if it lifts you higher, put in me your desire, a passion worthy of your name. On the sound forever, heart and heaven together, singing holy is your name. And if it lifts you higher, put in me your desire, a passion worthy of your name.
What up? It's just after noon, which means it's showtime right here on Phantom. We are the first digital sports network at Facebook, facebook.com/Watch Phantom. Also on YouTube and on Twitch, so find us there as well. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page for Watch Phantom for all the latest in this digital sports media landscape, the new world order of sports media. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you are streaming live on the Phantom page on Facebook, or if you're watching on some of our partners' pages, whether that be around the Association Radio, also on the Ari Temkin Radio page, and on the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page. Tina Matthews says hello. Hey, Tina Matthews, how are you? Arnold Bird says Kay Leonard needed to speak up to say he wants out of San Antonio, not his uncle. And Marlon Takalan says hello. What's going on, guys? Hit the share button and help us grow the audience here, no matter where you're watching. Thanks for watching. AD Singh watching. What up, AD? How are you? Andy Harden as well. Mike Cardenas, Gabe Hernandez, asking Hillsong. Is that the Hillsong Blues? I don't know. I didn't hear the song that was playing during the intro. Andy Harden says, send Kawhi to Boston. If they can get Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum as a centerpiece and then a pick and another role player, the Spurs could easily be winners of that trade. Gabe Hernandez says, ahoy hoy. All right, so I guess let's start at the beginning here. And again, hit the share button if you wouldn't mind. And let's help to invite as many people as we possibly can to the show today. Let me also see if I can't get rid of that spot. So, whoa, now I've got a light there. Whoa. All right, there we go. Is that better? A little bit? All right, how about that? Okay, cool. All right, I'm Ari Temkin, formerly of ESPN San Antonio, and what's interesting to me is I've been following this story. I've covered the Spurs for the last 6 years for ESPN San Antonio. I was there during the finals in 13 and 14, so I've had some history with this team and this organization. And so I think this sort of started, I wouldn't say at this point last year, but as we got further and further into the summer, there were certainly some indications that, Kawhi Leonard would miss some time. I think initially it starts, and it's like, the Spurs ruled him out for the entire preseason. Okay, so what? What's the big deal there? Who cares? And so I think that's kind of where this whole thing starts is, all right, so he's going to miss the entire preseason, no big deal, whatever. Spurs will be fine. And then, it just continues to go downhill where you start to hear rumors about, well, he's unhappy in San Antonio, which, to be honest, were certainly things that we had heard over the last couple of years. Not that he was unhappy, but that there were indications that he maybe wanted to go back to California. But you kind of always sort of push those aside to say, well, this is a guy that loves Pop. He loves playing for the Spurs. He's in a really good situation where, he's sort of not the most outwardly outspoken individual, so the Spurs protect him and they're able to shield him from the media, plus not a huge market. So, even if the Spurs do their, work to shield him in some ways, it's certainly not a market that commands tremendous attention like some of the bigger markets. So it just seemed like between Pop, the Spurs organization, the way they've handled themselves, and the market size relative to other markets that fits him and his personality, that this was the best place for him, the best situation for him, despite the fact that there were certainly rumors that Kawhi and maybe Kawhi's uncle wanted him to at some point go back to Los Angeles. And, so I think, in the back of most people's minds, that was there. Maybe that Kawhi wanted to potentially go back to San Antonio at some point. Tim Matthews says, hi, guy. Sylvia Pena says, K. Diaga Algo Leonard. That I don't know what that means. Arnold Bird says, listening to his uncle, he's gonna lose a lot. Keep the comments coming, by the way. I'll continue to sort of address them as we move along with the show. I'm going to try to mix in, my own sort of thoughts and perspectives on this with all of the comments that everybody's posting along all the different pages that we are broadcasting live on. Again, San Antonio Spurs Spirit page, thanks to them and our partners over there. And, of course, we're on the Association Radio, also on YouTube as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for finding us on YouTube. Make sure to post your comments there as well. And, of course, on the Phantom page as well, I'll get to those comments too. All right, so let me at least quickly go over there to kind of see if anything's cooking over there. And thank you, Gabe Gonzalez, who's sharing this with some people. Zach Rosenberg on the Phantom page says, how much will this change the draft? I think dramatically. This could dramatically alter the impact, the draft on Thursday. The draft is Thursday night, and so there's a lot that can happen, obviously, between now and then, especially because of the chance the Spurs could trade, could package Kawhi in a trade that gives them a top 5 pick, potentially the second overall pick, could obviously dramatically impact the total draft. Larry Manick says, looking official AF. Kind of decided to dress up a little bit today. Gussy myself up. Normally I go with the t-shirt look, which is kind of my style, but I figured today I'd gussy up a little bit as we talked to Kawhi. Tristan Ducross says, is the rumor that Tony Parker took a shot at Kawhi about his injury, that he came back from an injury and that Kawhi should come back? It was not a rumor. I mean, Tony said it publicly. I mean, Tony basically said, I had the same injury and I came back. Mine was worse and I came back quicker. And, I mean, he obviously, that's heavily criticizing a guy that, for whatever reason has missed the entire season last year. And, and obviously that, that was problematic for the Spurs. So it frustrated the Spurs. It frustrated Spurs players. So it kind of led to them, multiple players, coaches speaking out publicly, against Kawhi in a sense. And Corey Cole says, Buenos dias, Corey Cole. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a rumor. Tony Parker did say it. And, obviously it was something that rubbed Tony Parker the wrong way, or rubbed Kawhi Leonard the wrong way. All right. So let's get back to the start. So again, summer starts. The Spurs announced at some point, at the end of the summer, probably August, September, that he was going to miss the entire preseason. No big deal. Although in the back of your mind, you're thinking those rumors about that he wanted to be back in LA, that maybe that there's some truth to those rumors, right? But then, it's like, well, he's going to miss some time during the regular season. And it's like, okay, you still start to think, all right, well, can this team sort of weather the storm in the absence of Kawhi? But there was no timetable on Kawhi. There was never any timetable on when he was going to come back. And the further along in the season that you got, the more it was like, all right, is this thing ever going to get back to normal? Like, I think when the season starts, there was this notion of, it will eventually get back to normal. He'll come back. Can the Spurs compete with Golden State? When we last saw the Spurs with Kawhi, that they were close with Golden State. And, so how much of an impact will this now have on that? And especially because, well, LaMarcus Aldridge was a new player for the Spurs. He was playing at a higher level, and he was playing at a higher level, And so, again, it just is, when Kawhi comes back, how effective will this team be able to be? And Jonathan Hood watching. Well, Jay Hood, how are you, buddy? I don't think he's going to end up with the Bulls, Jay Hood. Although I really would like to see the Bulls be able to draft MPJ. I'm big on Porter. I wonder what you are. What do you think about this whole situation, Jay Hood? Very similar to D Rose, right? Very, very similar to D Rose. The only thing that I could think of, Jay Hood, in the recent history of the NBA of this from a parallel standpoint is D Rose. And Rose seemingly missed. I'd say it was more justified for Rose missing the following season after that ACL injury. I don't know that it is, but it's certainly, in my opinion, I mean, he had a surgery, he was coming off a surgery. From the standpoint of Kawhi Leonard, he hasn't even had surgery. He missed all this time and didn't even have surgery on it. Justin Jones watching, Jenna Garcia in the house. What up, what up, what up? Make sure to hit the share button. And no matter where you're watching, whether it be on the Around the Association radio page, on the Ari Temkin radio page, Mario Drake says, what up? Hi, Mario. How are you? Ari Temkin radio. Post your comments. Justin Morrow in the house. What up, Justin Morrow? And then, of course, our friends at the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page. Thank you for letting us cross-post this on your page. Post your comments wherever you're watching. And make sure to hit the share button so that we can get this thing rolling. 4 people are watching on YouTube. That's a new high for me on YouTube. All right. Okay. So this thing just got weird. Like it went from when Kawhi comes back, how effective can they be? How can they mix LaMarcus, who is, he was more involved offensively in what they've been doing, which is something he wanted. It was something he talked about this entire offseason, wanted to be more involved. So the whole talk throughout the first half of the season was, well, when will Kawhi come back? And, can they compete with Golden State with this new LaMarcus and then Kawhi being what he's been? And then, of course, mixing in the other pieces. How good can this team be? And that was that was really the biggest storyline throughout the course of the year until there started to become rumors out. I want to say off the top of my head, the first rumor that came out, that sort of stoked the flames of this was the rumor with Jalen Rose saying that there's friction. That Kawhi's uncle, they say Kawhi's people, Kawhi's uncle and his agent were sort of upset with how, the Spurs medical staff handled this situation, that they misdiagnosed this quadriceps tendinopathy, which is something else. And so that was the start of some friction between the Spurs and Kawhi Leonard. Now, look, it's worth noting again that there had been rumors previously about Kawhi's uncle wanting Kawhi to be back in LA. Again, hearing those rumors prior to this season, you don't know how substantiated they are because Kawhi, again, fit perfectly in this system, fit perfectly with this coach, had a great relationship with this coach, and seemed to fit perfectly in this market, conducive to more of a now outwardly outspoken sort of individual. So, you hear those rumors and you don't, they don't mean much because they don't seem substantive, again, because you just don't know, based on all those other factors, that there's truth or legitimacy to them. 1, and 2, Kawhi's uncle and agent might want him to be back in LA, but how much does Kawhi want to be back in LA, based again on the fact that he has all these things going for him in this market with this organization, and on and on and on. Tina Matthews says, stop drinking. It's coffee. Apologies, Tina. Marlon Takalon says, is Kawhi aligned without Pop? Again, without Pop. And then Tina Matthews says, Kawhi used his injury to his advantage. He wanted out, so he used his injury. And so I think, there is a little bit of truth to that. That insofar as, that again, having heard the rumors in the past that Kawhi had wanted to go back to LA, then I go back to, his not recruiting Kevin Durant. So remember, you go back to when Kevin Durant was a free agent, the Spurs had a meeting with him, and Kawhi Leonard did not go to that meeting. And the thinking was, at least from Spurs fans, well, I mean, his girlfriend was, due with their baby during the summer, so maybe he didn't want to leave her. And I tweeted out that's not a good move. You need your guy in Kawhi Leonard to be you need your guy in Kawhi Leonard to be out there recruiting, because that's the era of the modern NBA. You need, and we see now in hindsight that Golden State, that their players, Draymond Green and Steph Curry, they'd already been recruiting Kevin Durant. So for Kawhi Leonard to not be doing that, it's a major, major problem. And I said that at the time. People criticized me. I was pretty heavily criticized on Twitter for criticizing Kawhi for not going and not, and Jerry Granados says, good afternoon, all right, good afternoon, Jerry. I was heavily criticized for criticizing Kawhi for not recruiting Kevin Durant. But for me, and this goes back to Derrick Rose again, Rose in the same way wasn't willing to go recruit LeBron that first time around. Now we see how silly it is in hindsight. But again, these things matter. In the modern era of the NBA, players are recruiting other players. And so, in that vein, if Kawhi Leonard was unwilling to go to meet with Kevin Durant, there's no chance the Spurs are going to land Kevin Durant. And, at the time, maybe it was this idea of, well, maybe he didn't want to play with Kevin Durant. Maybe it was that his girlfriend could go in labor at any moment, and so he didn't want to risk that. But I think, now in hindsight, maybe it was the idea that he didn't know if he wanted to be in San Antonio long term. And, that the biggest issue there was he didn't want to recruit Kevin Durant to come to San Antonio, and he himself wasn't sure that he wanted to be in San Antonio long term. Again, I'm sort of rewriting history based on the significance of hindsight, but I think it's important to note. AD Singh chiming in on the Ari Temkin radio page. What are Kawhi's uncle's qualifications to represent him other than being family? Well, that's it. And, again, Kawhi Leonard's father was murdered, and, that his uncle became a central figure in his life, so he trusts his uncle. And you can't blame him for doing so. Kawhi's uncle is also a business owner. So, again, what's his qualifications to represent him as an agent? Pretty slim relative to, going to law school and having experience in representing professional athletes. But, he's a family member who certainly has the trust of Kawhi Leonard and is a self-made man based on his business practices. But I'm probably giving him too much credit in that vein anyways. Ishmael Garza chiming in on the Phantom page says, but Derek didn't want to leave the Bulls, did he? No, but I'm not saying that they're the same in regards to, Kawhi maybe didn't recruit Kevin Durant because he didn't know if he was going to stay in San Antonio, and therefore Derrick Rose didn't recruit LeBron James because he didn't know if he wanted to stay in Chicago. I think they were completely different reasons. Derrick Rose didn't recruit LeBron because, I don't know, he's got some screws loose. I'm not sure, but obviously, Ishmael, you're right. It's not like he wanted to leave Chicago. And look, I'm not saying anything about Kawhi that I'm reporting. I'm just saying I criticized Kawhi when he didn't go and recruit Kevin Durant, and people killed me for doing it by saying, well, he's fine. Tim Duncan's going, everybody else is going, and he just wants to be in a place where he can be by his girlfriend's side when she has the baby. And I get all that, but to me it was like, no. You've got to be, if you want to be the face of this franchise, and you want to actually have Kevin Durant, think about coming to San Antonio, he needs to be there. Your best player needs to be recruiting him. And look, maybe he was always going to Golden State. Maybe that was always the case. But a big reason why he went to Golden State, Durant, was because Draymond Green and Steph Curry heavily recruited him to go to Golden State. In the same way that the next year, last season, James Harden was outwardly recruiting Chris Paul to come to Houston. That's the modern era of the NBA. Players are recruiting their friends to come play with them. They come together. They make decisions beyond general managers making those decisions. Gabe Gonzalez says Kawhi has some screws loose also. So, Jalen Rose is outward reporting that there's some friction between both sides. And by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching this. Make sure to post your comments as we continue on. We're streaming live on Facebook on 4 different pages. On the Phantom page, we're part of the Phantom Network, obviously. Facebook.com/Watch Phantom. Phantom is the new world order of sports media. So check us out. We are the first digital sports media network on all digital platforms. So stream us on YouTube, on Twitch, and on Facebook, and make sure to tell your friends, like the page, and also hit the share button on this post so we can grow the audience and talk Kawhi Leonard. Eric Bishop says DeJounte started recruiting LeBron James after Game 4 of the Finals. It's the way it is. I think DeJounte probably started recruiting LeBron James prior to Game 4 of the NBA Finals. And LeBron might have been like, yeah, bro, I don't think Kawhi is going to stay there, and therefore I'm not coming to San Antonio. It's beside the point. So Jalen Rose started to stoke the flames a little bit with the friction between the Spurs and Kawhi's uncle and Kawhi in general, and that maybe he didn't want to be with San Antonio much longer. And Spurs fans immediately just shoved it to the side, which I get why they do that. Like, you don't want to believe that a guy that's been, your best player, Finals MVP, has become a top 5 player in the league, maybe even a top 2, top 3 player in the league. You don't want to believe that guy doesn't want to be in your city anymore, especially because this was the only substantive evidence that we had that he didn't want to be there. But then as the season progressed, and there was like, was he going to come, he came back for those 9 games or 7 games, whatever it was, but it was like, he was back for 1 game, and then he rested. He was part of on the Spurs schedule, which was being as conservative as they could possibly be. It was just weird. And then he obviously went on this, long-term, leave of absence from the team, where he was just gone from the team, and he was, in New York rehabbing there. And it just started to get to a point where it was like, yeah, I don't know if he's going to come back at all this year. And maybe these rumors that he doesn't want to be in San Antonio, maybe they're true. And look, I'll admit it, there was a point, I can't remember when it was, and I want to give credit to my buddy Don Harris from News 4 and my former co-host David Chancellor, his cohort at News 4. But there was a point in time where Kawhi came back and then left, and it looked at that point like he wasn't going to play at all for the rest of the year. And Don Harris said at that point on Twitter, that's the last time we've already seen Kawhi Leonard play in a Spurs jersey for the last time. And I took the opposite approach, because I thought at that point there was an actual date that he was going to be coming back, because that was what was being reported. There was an actual date that he had targeted to be returning, and I have a pretty good authority that date was a pretty firm date. He was planning on coming back at that date. So I basically took the opposite approach from Don Harris and said, no, he's going to play this year. One, because if he doesn't, he's compromising his ability to cash in on that Supermax, which would pay him as much as $219 million, which is $40 million more than any team can offer him. Oh, and by the way, pays him $50 million in the last year of the deal. It's a pretty good deal. If he didn't return, then he's compromising his ability to cash in on that deal. So I even thought, even when it looked it looked bad, it looked like he wasn't going to come back, that he still would be coming back. And yet, Don Harris maintained that was the last time that we were ever going to see him in a Spurs jersey, and that appears now to be truthful. So I guess the question is, how did we get here? How did we get here from this player being the next darling in San Antonio, going from David Robinson to Tim Duncan to Kawhi Leonard, right? Like, 3 guys that certainly had similar personalities, that fit the bill for this city, that were hard workers, that didn't have big egos, that wanted to be here, that didn't command much media attention. How did we get to a point where you have David Robinson and Tim Duncan that completely exemplified the Spurs' selfless ethos, team first, those kinds of things, to Kawhi Leonard doing the exact opposite, to Kawhi Leonard being the antithesis of that ethos? How did we get here? Well, I think first and foremost, we got here because, one, Tim Duncan's presence on that team did mean that much. And it's as we now know, basically impossible to replace a guy like that. We thought the Spurs did. We thought the Spurs were able to replace a guy like Tim Duncan, and they weren't. We thought it was that easy, and if anybody could make it that easy, then it was the Spurs. Joan Wilson says it at the point where I don't care. Don't care about where it went wrong, or the entire Kawhi situation. Elaborate on that, Joan. Arnold Bird says, if Tony Parker didn't make the comment, I think Kawhi Leonard would have stayed. With the team or still in San Antonio? And Joan, I get your point, but I think it's also worth noting, like, how he got here is important because it points to Tim's greatness. Because you don't just lose a guy like that and not lose anything, I guess is the best way to say it. And when he's there, when he's there to personify this ethos for the Spurs, selflessness, well then, I mean, you're going to be successful because all the other players are going to fall in line because he's a legend. But when he leaves, there's mass chaos in a sense from that ethos, the organizational ethos, because there's not a player there that's that good that can exemplify those characteristics and those traits. So I think that's important to note. If you're watching this, by the way, hit the share button and help us grow the audience. And also, if you're watching this, post where you think Kawhi ends up, and at this point, if you're a Spurs fan, do you want to see Kawhi end up somewhere else? Do you not want to see Kawhi Leonard with the Spurs anymore? Mario Drake on the Around the Association radio page says, how can we guarantee Kawhi will have and show the loyalty to the Lakers or Clippers or how he left the Spurs? Or how do we know that Kawhi won't do the same thing, in other words? Which is a very fair point. And I mean, the thing that I find sort of most intriguing about that is you would think that would diminish his market a little bit, right? Like, you'd think that the way in which the whole season's gone down with Kawhi Leonard and the Spurs would diminish, his market value. And I don't know that it does. And I think so much of that is based on just the idea of, teams are willing to pursue star players, for anything, because star players are the currency for greatness in the NBA. If you don't have a star player, you don't have a shot of being great. So I think somewhere like the Lakers might look at this and say, well, yeah, I mean, but that was San Antonio. It was a completely different situation. So I think teams would overlook some of those things. I think it's important to note, Mario, but I think some teams would be willing to overlook those kinds of things because in pursuit of greatness, in pursuit of having a star player. Which I think, again, is an important thing to note. Let's see, on the Phantom page, Millie Lev says, why would Kawhi build a home for himself and his mother in San Antonio if he was planning on leaving the Spurs? Do not know if that's true, because he was living here for 5 years. Leonard Ybarra says, I think the Spurs were not going to offer max deal this summer because the Spurs were going to wait. Then Kawhi's team used the tactic to make sure he got the max deal. So they played chicken, and now we are here. Still no meeting. And that I was actually against that. So Woj, so what we had was 3 media members who have close ties to Kawhi Leonard's, uncle and agent, Chris Haynes of ESPN, Jabari Young of the Express News, and Shams Charania of Yahoo, all reporting simultaneously that Kawhi Leonard wanted out of San Antonio, wanted to be traded out of San Antonio. That was where this all sort of starts or goes downhill for the Spurs. Then Woj comes out and says, San Antonio's Kawhi Leonard has Los Angeles, preferably the Lakers, at the center of his preferences for trade destination, league sources tell ESPN. Then he says, sources. So far, Leonard has expressed nothing directly to Spurs about future. Lakers and Clippers interest Leonard, and both teams would move quickly to assemble packages to acquire Leonard. Spurs won't rush. Leonard and his camp had shown no interest in 219 Supermax deal. That's the story. That's the story right there. Leonard and his camp had shown interest in $219 million Supermax deal. So what does that mean, right? So you have 3 media outlets in the Express News, ESPN, and Yahoo all reporting that Kawhi wants out of San Antonio. Then Woj comes and says, well, they're interested in that 219 Supermax. Weren't we all under the assumption that the Spurs would offer that? And therefore, if he was saying he wanted to be traded, he was rejecting that? And AD Singh says, I'm still holding on hope that we re-sign him, LOL, which I think is an important point to make here. And then Adrian Wojnarowski says, if Kawhi Leonard does become available in trade talks, the Celtics will be interested in probing the Spurs about a deal. League sources tell ESPN Boston inquired about a trade prior to the February deadline, sources said. Indiana had little interest in Paul George's trade with Lakers, and that'll be a case for Spurs too. Boston gives Spurs best building blocks of assets, one of young forwards, likely Jaylen Brown, its own 18th, 19th protected Kings pick, etc. Alonzo to Spurs, don't hold your breath. what's obviously most important here on this front is that Woj says that Kawhi and his people were interested in the 219 Supermax. Now, my buddy Jeff Garcia over at Project Spurs has a tweet from a guy named Steve Kyler, who is with the Basketball Insiders. And Eric Pincus said, quote, "I don't expect Kawhi to be dealt, to be determined." And then Steve Kyler says, "I had dinner with someone close to Kawhi last week. Word is he's completely fine with the situation, expects to sit with the Spurs and hammer out an extension. There are clearly things to talk about, but his side isn't looking for the door." So, on the one hand, you have Kawhi Leonard's people, his group, leaking out that he wants to be traded. That was what happened. Chris Haynes, Jabari Young, and Shams Charania all have sources, either his uncle, Kawhi himself, or his agent. I think that's obvious based on the news they've been reporting throughout the entire season. Freddie Dominguez says, "No matter what he does, our Spurs will be okay. Go Spurs, go." I think you're right, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So was it Friday? Was it Thursday or Friday? Jacob Diaz, how are you? On the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page, Arnold Bird says, "That's too much." Paul Michael David on the Spurs Spirit page says, "That's a lot to blame. That's a lot of blame to go around. We could have handled it better publicly, but Kawhi could have been more outspoken and said something, so all the speculation wouldn't be going around. At the end of the day, he'll still collect his $20 million from the organization. Only played 9 games. That team has every right to be upset with him." It's fair. Downtown Victor Brown, what up, buddy? And then around the association radio, just wanted to check in there again. Okay, cool. Just want to make sure everybody who's watching this has a chance to get their comments heard, because that's what this is all about. All right, share this post, hit the share button, help us grow the audience as we're talking about Kawhi Leonard. Okay, so we talked about sort of the situation where this thing got bad over the course of this season, and it tempers flared, because I think we had the Pop saying something publicly, Manu Ginobili saying something publicly, and then Tony Parker saying something publicly. But I think that's just a product of everybody was frustrated, right? Like, the Spurs were frustrated that they're paying this guy $20 million, that the expectation he was going to play this year, and that they could compete with Golden State is a byproduct of that. And the fact that he wasn't felt like he was quitting on the team. Kawhi was pissed off because he was upset with the way the organization handled this, both from a medical standpoint and from a PR standpoint. But I figured when this season ended, maybe cooler heads would prevail. There'd be time to sort of sit down and talk through these things. And then again, Kawhi had a good enough relationship with Pop that this thing, that again, cooler heads could prevail on this. But then, what was it, Thursday or Friday of last week? Friday morning last week? You had 3 sources that had ties to Kawhi's uncle agency and Kawhi that were saying Kawhi wanted to be traded. Which says to me, Kawhi wants to be traded because he's annoyed with the Spurs, and the situation was basically irreparable. Well, then you had Woj reporting Kawhi's group is interested in the $219 million Supermax. And then again, Steve Kyler from Basketball Insiders, "I had dinner with someone close to Kawhi last week. Word is he's completely fine with the situation, expects to sit with the Spurs and hammer out an extension. There are clearly things to talk about, but his side isn't looking for the door." So I guess the assumption that the Spurs were always offering the Supermax might not necessarily be true. And maybe the contention here is the Spurs wanted to use the leverage. Kawhi's group, his uncle, his agent, and Kawhi wanted to use the leverage they had, trying to force the Spurs to offer the Supermax, because the indication they got was that the Spurs didn't want to offer him the Supermax. Which is kind of crazy to think about. Because it seems like a good, savvy move, because I would be reluctant to pay that guy that much money. Remember, in the last year of the deal, he's going to make $50 million. And I know, he's a top 5 player, maybe a top 3 player, but he didn't play all last year, has these injury concerns, and you certainly have to question his mentality and motives if you're the Spurs. So while 29 other organizations, given the same circumstance, probably offer him the Supermax hands down, maybe there's some posturing on the side of the Spurs based on some of the drawbacks of offering him the Supermax. And so maybe Kawhi's uncle and agent leaked this to Chris Haynes, Jabari Young, and Shams Charania to basically force the Spurs' hand to offer him the Supermax. which I guess is good news if you're the Spurs and you're a Spurs fan, because you obviously want Kawhi Leonard to be back with the Spurs. And if it's just as simple as offering him the Supermax, that's a pretty simple fix, basically, right? AD Singh says, Timmy was eyeing Orlando and LA, wanted out too, but made it work. Fingers crossed. That's a fair point. Steven Vasquez says, do you think some of these sources are just trying to make the first splash, or do you think that if his camp says he'd be interested in LA, that would push Spurs management to offer Supermax? I mean, again, I guess my assumption was always that they'd offer him the Supermax, and I'm kind of surprised that that's the point of contention here. I think it's a savvy move by one of the savviest organizations in pro sports, if not the savviest organization in pro sports. But I'm surprised by it. I mean, I guess I thought that the Supermax wasn't really the question. It was whether or not he wanted to stay in San Antonio or whether or not he'd forego the Supermax in pursuit of another city, another place, another market. I just never really thought the Supermax was the point of contention. I thought the Spurs would always offer the Supermax. Aaron Christian de Guzman on the Phantom page says, smiley face, money bag, money bag, money bag, money bag. Anthony Green commenting on the Phantom page says, I think a meeting took place and the Spurs said no, $219 million until he plays a certain amount of games, see if he's healthy. Then Kawhi's camp dropped this to show them that he's serious. It puts the Spurs in the driver's seat. I mean, maybe a little bit. But, I mean, at the end of the day, if they're completely unwilling to accept anything less than the Supermax to stay with you, then either you offer the Supermax or you trade him. So, you know, I don't know who really fully has the leverage here, because if you trade him, then it's about trading him to a team that he's willing to re-sign a long-term deal with. So it's not like, you know, if you're the Spurs, you can just trade him to the Kings, because what if he doesn't offer, you know, what if the Kings don't want to make the deal unless he gets that unless they get the long-term deal done? So if Kawhi is going to be traded, but he says, I'm only going to be willing to take a long-term deal with the Lakers or Clippers, then, you know, you're sort of removing a leverage on where you can trade him. But if on the other side of it, you know, you offer him the Supermax, he stays with the Spurs. Now, you know, you're reluctant because of all the reasons I stated, the injury, you know, the fact that he missed the whole year, the mentality, you know, the leadership, those kinds of things. You know, at the end of the day, if he wants to stay in San Antonio, the only thing that keeps him in San Antonio is the $219 million Supermax. And if not, then he wants to be traded to the Lakers or Clippers, and he's only willing to accept a long-term. I mean, your hands are kind of tied if you're the Spurs. Jeremy Turner Montgomery in the house. What up? JTM, how are you, buddy? So, you know, but again, I just kind of go back to what I find to be the most interesting thing about this, which is the point of contention being the Supermax. And that maybe Kawhi Leonard's uncle and agent leaked this to the media because they were concerned. And I'll go back to JTM says Spurs have no leverage. They have a little bit. Probably not, though. I want to go back to the Anthony Green saying he thought they've already had a meeting. And I think everything that's been reported suggests they've not had a face-to-face meeting in person. Now, maybe they've had phone calls, and maybe that's where we're at as far as, you know, why they leaked this and why Woj is saying, well, they want the Supermax. Jacob Diaz says, good luck, Spurs. Arnold Bird says he's going to make more money here in San Antonio. No question about that. He's going to make significantly more money being in San Antonio. But, you know, so maybe they've had a meeting, but just not face-to-face. They had a meeting sort of, you know, over the phone where the Spurs were like, hey, you know, we're not sure we're going to offer the Supermax. And Kawhi's uncle and agent got pissed off about that. So they then leaked to Chris Haynes, Jabari Young, and Shams Charania, hey, we want to trade, we want out of San Antonio to sort of, again, take the leverage back from Kawhi's camp, seemingly from the Spurs, who thought they had the leverage by saying, we might not offer you the Supermax. Here's the deal we're thinking about. Jimmy Shapiro says, you totally look like a rabbi with that beard. And I called him Jimmy Shapiro. It's Jimmy Shapiro. That's my buddy. Todd Tanganen says, that condition is eminently treatable. Whatever happens is whatever happens. Glad you're back. Sorry I missed the first part of your show. Also says, July 1st, the new NBA year allows for unbalanced trades. Let's say the Spurs decide to trade Kawhi to the Lakers, and July 1st, the Spurs don't have to take the kryptonite deal of Luol Deng. In essence, the Spurs could say they want Ingram at $5.8 million, and the Lakers can take on Kawhi's $20 million. They wouldn't do that. Just do that, though, I feel. My buddy Todd Tangen, thank you for commenting on this as well. So that's the magic number is July 1st as far as when the new league year starts, so you don't have to get equal compensation. Spurs are not going to be willing to absorb Luol Deng's deal, which is a horrible deal with the Lakers. If they want to make the play for Paul George, LeBron, and Kawhi Leonard, they're going to have to do something with in order to try to make it work. But Todd, I feel like I'm now more of the positive one here because of this little thing that we've heard, again, from Woj, which was an odd thing for Woj to tweet from a standpoint of, again, I didn't think the point of contention here was the Supermax. So if the Spurs offer the Supermax and he accepts, then I guess I never really thought that was going to be in the way of Kawhi staying in San Antonio long term. But so Woj tweeted out in the firestorm of Kawhi wants out, Kawhi wants out, Kawhi wants out. Here's some potential trade partners. Woj tweets out, again, let me just make sure I have the tweet here verbatim. Sources, so far Leonard has expressed nothing directly to Spurs about future. Then he says something about the Lakers, and then he gets into the Leonard and his camp had shown interest in 219 Supermax deal. And then there's, of course, the comments from Steve Kyler today from Basketball Insiders that say, I had dinner with someone close to Kawhi last week. Word is he's completely fine with the situation, expects to sit with Spurs and hammer out extension. There's clearly things to talk about, but his side is looking for the door. It's shocking to me. So Kawhi's camp last week says he wants the door. He's looking for the door. Give him the door. And then this week says he doesn't want the door. No door. He's fine here. He'll stay here. We just need that Supermax. Which, if the Spurs don't offer, is shocking, right? Like, if the Spurs decide to say, we're going to trade you because we don't think you're worth the Supermax based on what you've shown us, that takes some big freaking balls. I mean, right? Like, I never thought we'd be here. I never thought we'd be at a point where we'd be asking whether or not the Spurs would actually offer him the Supermax. And that seems to be the point of contention here, which is crazy. Russell Birdie says, could we get Kuzma, Ingram, and a first-round pick for Kawhi? I think so. I think that's the deal. By the way, my best-case scenario trade, well, I have two of them. One is to the Kings. And that is for the second overall pick and Bogdan Bogdanovic. And that's only because I think Luka Doncic is the best player in this draft by far. And I think on the Spurs, like, he would just be perfect. I also like Bogdanovic. Like, he's a pretty good player. He scored 12 points a game last year on 40% shooting from three and 45% shooting from the field. That's a good shooter with high upside. Plus, I just love Doncic. So, like, I think Doncic is a star. I think he's perfectly made for today's NBA. And I think he is, as far as all the other prospects, has played and performed at a very, very high level, a higher level than any other prospects. So I think best case scenario for the Spurs, they can trade him to the Kings. One, because it'd be hilarious. He'd get to go back to California. Ha, ha, ha. But he'd be living a life in Sacramento, which would suck for him. So it'd be best case scenario for the Spurs because they trade him to obscurity. Plus, I think they return the best young player available out there, and Luka Doncic, who I, again, think he is the best player in this draft, and I don't even think it's close. The only thing that would suck then would be if the Suns decide that he is and then take him with the first overall pick as opposed to DeAndre Ayton, which is what's been the rumors all around. Eric Bishop says, agreed 100%. Doncic is Ginobili, but bigger, younger, and potentially better. Yeah, he's a 6'8" point guard who can shoot. He's a small ball, all-around offensive player that's basically played the majority of his career as the point guard and has played against high-level players. So, like, I just love him. I think he is Jeremy Mandel, a buddy of mine who is a University of Arizona graduate, says DeAndre Ayton shall haunt your dreams. Maybe. I just think Doncic is better, and to me, I take him over Jaylen Brown. I take him over Ingram and Kuzma. I take him over literally anybody the Spurs could get. So that's why I think Kings are the best trade partner for the Spurs. One, because, you're trading him to Sacramento. And two, because you're going to end up with Doncic, who I think is the best prospect that they could get, even beyond Jaylen Brown, which is crazy to say because Jaylen Brown's a guy that averaged, 18 points in the playoffs? I just think Doncic will be that good, especially with Pop and the Spurs. But, second best case scenario is Boston because you can end up with Jaylen Brown. And what I would do is, if I were the Spurs, I'd call Boston and say, for Jaylen Brown and for next year's Kings pick, which is, I think, top 1 protected. So as long as the Kings don't have the first overall pick, you get it, and it could be top 5. Eric Bishop says, the only one I would take instead of Doncic is Tatum. What about Brown and the Kings pick next year? Again, Doncic, for me, is the best player they could get. But if Kawhi says, I'm not going to sign an extension with Sacramento, and then so Sacramento decides to be kind of smart for once, we're not going to do that deal. But Kawhi says, well, I will sign an extension with Boston. Well, then second best case scenario is you trade him to Boston for Jaylen Brown and the Kings pick. Boston's not offering Tatum in the Kings pick. I don't think Boston's offering Tatum for Kawhi straight up. But if Kawhi says, if the Kings say no on the second overall pick and Bogdanovich, then because Kawhi doesn't want to sign an extension there, then to me, second best case scenario is Boston for Jaylen Brown and the Kings pick for next year. And then third would be Kuzma, Ingram, and the Lakers, I think, 25th overall pick in this year's draft. Aaron Guzman says Brown and Rozier plus pick from Kings. And that was the other one, too, I heard, was Brown and Rozier plus the pick from the Kings. I think Brown and the Kings pick would get it done, but maybe they add Rozier for a sweetener. I'm Ari Temkin. This is Phantom, Facebook's or the Digital Sports Network. Make sure to like the page. Make sure to hit the share button, by the way, if you wouldn't mind. Talking about Kawhi Leonard. 1, how do we get here for the Spurs? And 2, where does he end up? The crazy thing is, I thought when this news broke on, was it Thursday or Friday last week? Now I can't remember. I'm getting my days all mixed up. It was Friday morning, wasn't it? I thought when the news broke, it was done. I mean, Kawhi Leonard wants to be out. It seems pretty cut and dried. And again, I'll go back to what I've been saying this entire time. I've always said, I think at one point I was 80-20 he was going to leave versus coming back. And to me, that was all due to the fact that, that all of the evidence that we've had suggests that he doesn't want to be here. We didn't have any evidence that suggests he did want to be in San Antonio, but all the evidence we had suggested he didn't. And so obviously the latest of that would have been the report that came from Kawhi's uncle, seemingly. It was like he wants out, he wants to be traded. But again, if the point of contention here is that they want the Supermax and the Spurs aren't willing to offer that, that's, first of all, shocking from my standpoint, savvy to a certain degree, and I guess is the only way in which the Spurs can maintain some leverage in this entire situation. Paul Michael David on the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page chimes in, says, please give him his $219 million Supermax so we can all rest happy. And then he gave me the claw emoji. Arnold Bird says his uncle wants a wage. I think there's some truth in that. John Dyer says Boston would take Kawhi for Tatum. Interesting. Corey Cole says Philly. I don't know. I just don't like any of those packages for Philly. Steven Vasquez, I got that comment. Let me just scroll through some of the pages we're on. Mario Drake chiming in on the Association page. Kawhi Leonard to the Lakers for Brandon Ingram is a straight-up trade, or Kawhi to the Clippers for Tobias Harris in their first-round pick. Hoping Doncic is not the European superguard. Hype watch like the name Jerry Welch. True, I mean, there's been a lot that have flamed out, but I mean, there's been a lot of non-European prospects that have flamed out too. So I don't think that's like a European exclusive thing. I just love Doncic. Period. I think he's the best. I think he's the best player in this draft, and I don't even know if that's that close. Especially when you factor in like the modern era of the NBA. That's why I think the best case scenario for the Spurs is they trade with Sacramento and then they get Doncic. But I'm also not necessarily convinced that they trade him. Based on the fact that it seems like Kawhi's people leak this story, say that he wants to be traded, because seemingly the Spurs have given him no indication that they're going to offer him the Supermax. Which is crazy. It's crazy because there's 29 other teams in the NBA that, given the same situation, would offer Kawhi the Supermax. Hand over fist. And yet here are the Spurs, which I believe there are reservations to giving him a Supermax. I believe there should be reservations to giving him a Supermax. Remember, It's a 5-year deal, and in the last year of the deal, they're going to be paying him $50 million, which, I mean, that's like 45% of the total cap. So if you have concerns over this guy's injury history, if you've got concerns over this guy's, mentality, the leadership with his group, the buy-in from his uncle, from his agent, then you're right to sort of be a little bit reluctant on handing a guy a contract that in the final year of it will pay him $50 million, which again is like 45% of the total salary cap. Maybe it'll be less when you get down to it, but right. And Jacob Diaz says he only played in 9 games this season. Todd Tangenin says, and Rudy Gay just opted out and became a free agent. And what was the opt-in on that? The opt-in was pretty big on that, wasn't it? It was like $12 million? $9 million? Maybe it wasn't that much. Todd, I guess we've sort of traded places a little bit here, though, because I guess at the end of the day, my feeling is they will end up offering him $8.8 million. They will end up offering him the Supermax. Why would they not? If that's all it takes to bring him back, why will they not? And again, maybe it's the same reservations that they should have. The injuries, the lack of communication, the his organizational structure, Kawhi's people, as it were. But again, Woj, the Woj tweets the first, smoking gun, as it were, on this story, which is, okay, maybe the Spurs went back and said, we're not going to offer the Supermax. Because he says, quote, Leonard and his camp had shown interest in a 219 Supermax deal. Like that's, so in the firestorm of Kawhi wants out, Woj says, sources, so far Leonard has expressed nothing directly to Spurs about future. Spurs won't rush. Leonard and his camp had shown interest in $219 million Supermax deal. And then you have Steve Kyler, again from Basketball Insider, saying that he had breakfast with somebody with the Spurs, and that they basically said, he had breakfast with somebody or had lunch, had dinner. I got the meal wrong. Had dinner with someone close to Kawhi last week, and that that he's fine with the situation, that he expects to stay with the Spurs and hammer out an extension, meaning as long as they offer the Supermax, he's going to stay with the Spurs. So, again, this kind of goes back to, are the Spurs really not going to offer him the Supermax? Like, if the Spurs say, here's the Supermax, do you want to sign it or not? And he says no. That's kind of what I thought the situation was. Spurs offer him Supermax, he says no. He wants to be in a different city. Like, that's kind of where I always thought this thing was. And, and that would be the reason why he'd want out. And, it's bizarre now that Woj would say, well, his camp has shown interest in that Supermax, and Steve Kyler says basically the same thing. It's just a bizarre twist, one of the most ridiculous stories I've ever heard. And thank you both, Stephen Cox, Gabe Gonzalez says $8.8 million opt-out for Rudy Gay. So I certainly wonder if that tells us anything about Kawhi Leonard's intentions. I would venture to say no, because how much would Rudy Gay know Kawhi, considering he wasn't really around the team much this year? Aaron Guzman says, I think Spurs in their history, no player received a Supermax, even Timmy. Good point. Although it's a different era of the NBA. And I just can't see why they wouldn't offer Kawhi the Supermax. Again, even with all those reservations, I still think 29 other teams would offer him the Supermax, given the same circumstance. Todd Tangenin says, I say offer him the Supermax, cement him as the face of the franchise, and then find players that help him and the team win additional titles. Todd also says, not one writer has 100% committed that Kawhi is gone. There's always an outward like seems, appears, or perhaps strange pre-negotiation tactics by Uncle Dennis and Mitch Frankel, his agent. I miss Kawhi's old agent, Brian Elfis, who's suing him. If Danny Green opts out, that's more telling. I think that's fair. That's fair. If Danny Green opts out, that's more telling than Rudy Gay opting out. I don't know that Rudy Gay opting out tells us anything about Kawhi Leonard, because how could they have any relationship whatsoever? I guess you know, it's just bizarre to me. It's really bizarre to me that the Spurs wouldn't offer him the Supermax. And again, I think it's bizarre from a standpoint of, given the same circumstance, I think basically every other team would offer him the Supermax. But the Spurs are savvy enough to basically hold out on it. And maybe they will. They're looking for a face-to-face. But the only way the Spurs have any leverage in this circumstance is if they say, we're not going to give you the Supermax, we're just going to trade you. Unless you want to accept this other deal. Which, if you're Kawhi, you're saying, I want the Supermax or I want you to trade me. Well, then the Spurs have leverage. Because even if they're trading him to the Lakers, the place that he wants to go, they're the ones that decided his fate. Because they were unwilling to offer a deal that the majority of teams would have already offered him. And, and maybe, now here's the thing about Sacramento that's kind of interesting, right? So Sacramento may say, we don't want Kawhi in a trade because we don't know about if he's going to be here long term. Keep in mind, Sacramento doesn't have their pick next year unless it's the first overall pick. So, maybe they look and say, if we get Kawhi here, maybe Kawhi won't. Maybe they do the Oklahoma City tactic, which is, hey, this is our best chance to end up with a superstar. And by the way, we're not looking to take next year anyways because we don't have that pick. So we'd like to win as many games as we can, possibly get to the playoffs, and possibly convince Kawhi Leonard to stay here. So maybe the Sacramento Kings would offer, would be willing to entertain a trade for Kawhi, even if they don't get the security of Kawhi saying he'd stay there long term. But in that sense, they'd just be betting on, again, they're not really in play for a top 5 pick, so they'd have every reason to win games because Boston's getting that pick. I think it's like if it's between 2 and 30, so basically they're going to get the pick in the first round. And maybe, like Oklahoma City, they're just going to bet on, that Kawhi in a year there, where he's the face of the franchise, blah, 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 would be willing to stay there. And it's in California, which we know he obviously likes California. Todd Tangenin says there was no Supermax when Tim was here, right? But David once commanded 40% of the team's salary cap. Tim commanded 38.5% with his highest max deal. Should Kawhi get the deal in year 1, which would start at 19-20, that's just 31.5% of the salary cap. But what are you using that based on this year's number? And I wonder what it would be in year. I wonder what it would be in year 5 of the deal. At any rate, I guess I'm more confident now that Kawhi comes back than I've been in a long time. Again, simply because if it's just as simple as offering the Supermax, I just don't find any situation in which the Spurs don't. And if they don't, then the Spurs feel like there's a lot of young assets they can get out there that are less of a headache, that are on rookie deals. Remember, because it's not just about what Kawhi brings to the table today versus what Luka Doncic or Jaylen Brown brings to the table today. I mean, you're also talking about a guy that you have to pay the Supermax now versus, kicking the can down the road on a young asset that you can mold as part of your organizational structure, which is kind of interesting. Plus, you certainly have to wonder, about you would certainly have to wonder about, how upset the Spurs are with the way that this situation was handled this season at Kawhi, and do they like some of the young assets out there? They think, because again, I trust the Spurs more than basically every other organization in sports to scour the open market and find guys that are going to end up becoming really good players. Like if you've got a guy that commands multiple young assets, then there's no team better than the Spurs to scour the landscape of the NBA to take advantage of those, to find the best assets. So I think that's obviously working in the Spurs' favor. Michael Adams says, can we use that Supermax money on other players? It's a complicated question, but the short answer to that is no. Only a team, the team that he plays for can offer him the Supermax. But I mean, there's a lot of salary cap things to discuss on this front, which we will certainly get into on future shows. All right, answer everybody's question. I guess I sort of started off at the end of last week thinking he was definitely gone, because my assumption was that the Spurs were going to offer him the Supermax and that he was basically saying, no, I'd like to be traded, which is what Chris Haynes, Shams Charania, and Jabari Young reported. But then we hear Woj report and then Steve Kyler basically say, no. This team just wants to negotiate an extension. They want, his group wants the Supermax. And again, it's not being reported the Spurs aren't offering the Supermax, but certainly Woj's comment of Kawhi's team is interested in the Supermax certainly leads you to believe that maybe the Spurs are reluctant to offer him the Supermax, and that's why Kawhi's group, his uncle and agent, sort of leaked this out. But, throughout this entire process, I was basically saying 80-20, 80 he's gone, 20 he stays, and it's almost like now I'm sort of just shifting the other way, because it seems like if the power is simply in the Spurs to offer him the Supermax and he's willing to accept, then we've got no problems here. And maybe if the Spurs don't, and then they trade him, it's actually the right move in the long term, even though it sounds like a ridiculous thing to say today. All right, I'm Ari Temkin. It's showtime every day at noon right here on Phantom. We are the digital sports media network, the new world order of sports media. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/watch Phantom. You can also find us on Twitch and on YouTube. Make sure to check out all the great things we've got going on, whether they're on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to our page. Make sure to like our page on Facebook, and then check out our great partners as well around the Association Radio. Does some fantastic work on the NBA. And Danny Thompson over around the Association Radio, and the San Antonio Spurs Spirit page as well. Check out their great work as well. The San Antonio Spurs Spirit page. Javier does some fantastic work as well there. And Todd says, welcome to my side of the ledger, Ari. Well, again, it's interesting the way that it's being reported now. And it almost seems like the Spurs were like, we're going to offer you an extension, but it's not going to be a Supermax. And then they're like, whoa, any negotiation we're willing to have with you, any chance you have for Kawhi to want to stay here starts with you offering the Supermax. And they're like, okay, bye. We'll trade you to the Sacramento Kings for Luka Doncic and Bogdanovic, and we'll turn Doncic into a top 5 player in the NBA in the 5 years that you're going to be paying this guy $175 million. Corey Cole says, good show today, amigo. Appreciate you, brother. Appreciate everybody watching. Make sure to check out the page every single day at 12 noon Central Time right here on Phantom, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be on YouTube. Find us and make sure to post your comments. And most importantly, we'll be talking a lot of Kawhi over the course of this week, so make sure to tune in. We're going to have a lot of great draft coverage as well. And this is really shaping up to be a very interesting draft for the San Antonio Spurs, who, they're drafting 15th? So even if they don't make a trade and Kawhi is still with the Spurs on Thursday when the draft happens, they're picking 15th. But a lot of interesting storylines leading up to the draft for the San Antonio Spurs, which has not been the case for them in a very, very long time. All right, thank you to everybody for watching. Thank you for everybody for commenting. I hope you got to all your comments today. Thank you. I'm back tomorrow at noon. Thank you for watching. But for now, I am out. Peace.